Welcome to Libertarian Counterpoint. My name is John Cameron. I'll be the moderator of the show this evening. The show can be seen at 8 o'clock on Thursday on Local Access Sacramento Network, I think channel 17, and is also available on YouTube. And on the show tonight, we're going to do things slightly differently this evening. I'm going to introduce myself, and which I think I already did. I work for Pacific Legal Foundation. As a development officer, I raise money so that my organization can defend the Constitution of the United States. And I'm going to turn the introduction over to Brett next.
Brett Owens, co-founder of a software company called Lead Dino. We make marketing software that helps small businesses market their websites. And I'm also editor-in-chief of Contrarian Outlook, where we focus on dividend-paying investments.
Cool. And Gerald?
My name is Gerald Clift. I'm an attorney and computer programmer.
Okay. And then I think it's really interesting when you get three libertarians together. We never have more than one libertarian speak because they'll disagree with each other. And it's interesting how we came to libertarianism. I came to it through reading Ayn Rand at age 16. And then, really realized that when I was in the military, I signed an oath that said I swore to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And after a while, I realized that there was a lot of enemies domestic in black robes as judges, unelected bureaucrats that had all three powers invested in government and had never been given to them, and some elected officials that instead of protecting and defending the Constitution chose to amend and ignore it. And that's why I'm doing what I do for a living, and that's why I'm an advocate for liberty whenever I can get there. Brett, how did you arrive at...
So for me, it started a little later in my early 20s when I got a real job and realized that I did not have much personal freedom at that time, so started looking for personal freedom in the form of basically financial freedom. Found my way to Harry Brown, the old Finding Freedom in an Unfree World. So that appealed to me because you had a lot of control over yourself, maybe not less so the farther out you go, but looking for ways to achieve the personal freedoms, and then start reading the other societal type libertarian readings as well, the Ayn Rands and such.
Okay. All right. And Gerald, how did you arrive where you are today, a staunch libertarian?
Well, for me, I have been passionate about the Patriot Act, my opposition to it, and
not a staunch defender of the total destruction of the Constitution, are you then?
No, I was very disillusioned that passed, and I felt very strongly about some other issues the libertarians hold dear, like ending the drug war. And then Ron Paul came along during the presidential debates, and he just spoke to me, and just all these issues just seemed to be just right on the nail. And I followed him more, went out to Iowa to help him out in his first presidential run, and learned more and more about libertarianism, and staunch defender of it.
Cool. All right. And since probably only libertarians are watching the show, we can't convert anybody, but hopefully we'll give you some good talking points and reinforce your understanding that this path is the right one. So the first thing we're going to talk about tonight is a case that Pacific Legal Foundation defended a guy named John Duarte in Duarte Nursery versus Corps of Engineers. It started in 2012 when John plowed a field, which is, there's something called Waters of the United States. And the laws that support Waters of the United States specifically spell out the fact that plowing is exempt from any laws. And he got in a little, I don't know, how can I say this politely, a disagreement with local Corps of Engineers officials who said that somehow he managed to destroy waters of the United States, meaning vernal pools or puddles that for about three weeks out of the year are 6 inches deep. So after, 4 years off and on in court and violation of his First Amendment rights and rights to due process, facing fines of $2.3 million and mitigation costs that could be $48 million, John Duarte agreed to settle for $1.1 million for plowing a field. And I'd like everybody who's watching the show to go to Pacific Legal Foundation's website and look at the facts of the case. And then Google before and after pictures of the pasture that was supposedly where all these horrible acts happened. The pasture, it's pasture now, was going to be a wheat field. Looks exactly the same now as it did 4 years ago, and who knows how much the guy spent on legal fees. And he settled, basically because he was at risk of losing his business, putting 500 people out of work and more. So I'd just like to open it up, kind of the administrative state thing, where these independent regulatory agencies have the executive, judicial, and legislative powers all on their own. They're given a mandate by Congress to really follow a certain mission, and they're given pretty strict guidelines on it, and then they write their own regulations and enforce their own actions, and they judge whether or not those actions are right or wrong. And I'd like to open that up and ask, is this right?
No, I think it's very sad. I mean, as you pointed out, he's facing over $40 million possibly in costs. So it's not even really a choice, betting that you can spend $1 million or risk spending $40 million and risk the lives of all your workers, your family. This is a general problem that Mike Lee, senator from Utah, likes to talk about a lot, that the federal government and really localities as well, but they've grown so large that these bureaucracies write all these regulations, and Congress has no say in what effectively becomes law affecting all of us. So we're not really so much represented by the people that we elect to represent us, but more so the people that are just hired throughout the bureaucratic institutions, and I think it's wrong.
Yeah, we saw this. I saw this firsthand with a friend who. So if you own a business, you usually pay estimated taxes, where you write a check to the federal government, you write a check to the state government, you do it on a quarterly basis. They now have options to let you pay electronically, and I never pay electronically because I don't trust them. My friend owns a
you don't trust our government.
I know it's surprising.
I'm
I know it's surprising. So I would rather send the check, let them cash it, and that is that. They don't have access to the account. I have a friend who has a consulting practice, and he was paying electronically, and then they deemed that he owed them employment taxes. He has no employees. They took some odd $5,000-$6,000 just out of his account, and then they sorted it out with him. So they just took his money, and then they asked questions later.
Is that legal?
Doesn't sound legal, but they now had his money, and he was guilty until proven innocent.
So that's almost like asset forfeiture by electronic means. Yeah.
Yeah, this comes up a lot. A few years ago, I want to say the Washington Post had an article about how there was more civil asset forfeiture than actual theft. And then in the cases you're talking about, these small businesses can be ruined too. There was New York Times had a good article about how a few businesses where the owners would deposit more than $10,000 into their bank account over and over again got flagged as having suspicious activity, and actually ended up having, in one case, over almost $100,000 seized via civil asset forfeiture. And then it's on the owner to go to basically argue that they should have never had their property seized, which is totally backwards. You should have a case first and then have your property seized.
I think that isn't the presumption in the French judicial system that you're guilty and then you have to prove your innocence. Here we're innocent until proven guilty, except if cops need a little extra money to go on a vacation.
Well, that's the worst part of it. They get to spend it too.
They get to spend it. And the normal moderator for the show has said repeatedly, and I believe him because he usually has his facts straight, that civil asset forfeiture, takes more money from people than burglary in this country. So that's a little scary thought. Well, I think we might have, since we're all in agreement, and probably 99% of our viewers, that giving power to bureaucrats to have all three powers of government rolled up into one, which Congress doesn't have the power, the President doesn't have the power, even the Supreme Court doesn't, but somehow we hand all this power over to a local bureaucracy, is probably a very bad thing and patently unconstitutional. So, next thing, the lamestream media's selective approach to First Amendment rights. And we're going to talk about a really touchy subject, the Charlottesville rally and all the fallout, and just as a starting point, and then move on to maybe some less, what's the word I'm looking for? Less touchy examples of that, perhaps. Maybe we can't get anywhere with this and we just go to less touchy. So, Brett, you want to chime in on that?
Sure. Well, I would imagine we're in agreement that no matter what we think of the group, they have the right in this country to free speech. My take on it would be also, though, if you're looking for a fight, you at least have to pay for your own security. My issue is that, and we saw this at the Capitol here within the last year, where a similar type party marched. They get all geared up like they're looking for a fight. There was violence that broke out with the counter protesters, but that takes a lot of police force to provide security for both parties. And my view on it is that if you're going to do that, I like the old libertarian saying, you can do whatever you want as long as you don't bother anyone else. In this case, you're kind of bothering other people in terms of you're using public resources and you're hogging them, and you're taking police that maybe should be somewhere else, and now they're posted up in front of this protest, making sure nobody else gets hurt. I think that burden, the financial burden of the security, has to be. It's fine, in my opinion, if you want to march, but you got to pay for the protection yourself.
I'm going to ask a clarifying question. I like your idea, except for, I think, the idea of private security. I would think that if you buy the security, whoever's writing the check would get the most protection. So maybe we ask the people who are marching to pay for the police services, so that their actual salaries can be spent somewhere else. That'd just be an idea. I mean, I like the idea that, if you're going to do something that's probably going to lead to a kerfuffle, a little, some fisticuffs, that you should pay for it. And again, it's fuzzy. But what do you think?
Well,
Gerald?
I definitely think certainly the white supremacists that were there were looking for a fight. I mean, Trump wanted to call out the left for bringing weapons, but plenty of eyewitness accounts, according to LA Times, found white supremacists carrying rods and other weapons when they went in there. And when it comes to the cops, private security is probably something they should have paid for. But what's interesting is multiple eyewitness accounts confirmed that the cops basically just sat there and let these people just tear each other apart.
Duke it out.
Yeah, whereas you'd think that would be a situation in which, they're there, they would try to intervene and prevent people from causing harm to each other, or at the very least start arresting the people who appear to be the actual aggravators causing all the violence. But go ahead. I would say it's a touchy topic. It's everyone has the right to free speech, no matter how abhorrent it is. There was a good New York Times article a couple days ago about.
Wait, hold on. Stop the presses. There was a good New York Times article?
I actually, though they lean left in terms of their overall bias, I would say they're pretty good at fact checking. I mean, you get a lot of the Edwards.
Except for that, they had to backstep. They ran a headline that said that these people needed to release some information about, I think, climate change or something, because they were worried about Trump suppressing this information about the truth about climate change. But then they found out that so-called suppressed information had been available online for 8 months, and so they had a little egg on their face. But if you look at Google, if you just on my homepage, when I put up Google News, that article, which has been retracted, is still the top article that comes up on my page. So that's my take, is that the lamestream media, in this case now it's Google, which used to be pretty objective, really is very selective in their choice.
Well, I was going to talk about the article was actually about the ACLU and the struggle that they've had, because they lost a lot of membership when they defended Nazis a few decades ago. And even in Charlottesville, they were the ones to say, no, these white supremacists get to protest at the site of the statue rather than what the city wanted for them to be at a much larger park several blocks away. But generally speaking, I don't really lump the New York Times or even the Washington Post, although they were bought recently by Jeff Bezos, and LA Times and these other news periodicals within what I would call the mainstream media. 90% of the news we see is owned by about 6 companies, and actually all the media in general. And those conglomerates really control most of what we see. The newspapers tend to be, again, Washington Post bought out recently, but owned by the same families for more than 100 years, and they're the papers that provide us whether it be the Pentagon Papers or the Edward Snowden docs, and I do think they do a pretty good job at that reporting. And both the New York Times and LA Times have, at least I've seen the last couple of days, and both editorial boards and just general articles talked about the need for debate on both sides, even when it's abhorrent, that we can't just drown them out entirely.
Well, I'm haven't been paying attention to it, but I'm very pleased that the newspapers and the ACLU, which has been very disappointing to me in many respects over the last few years, would defend free speech rights. Maybe the Republic isn't lost after all.
Whereas,
go ahead.
I was going to say, MSNBC, Pew study found that they were the most biased news organization in the entire country, second only to Fox News during the 2012 presidential election.
Even more than the Clinton News Network, CNN?
Even more than them. They might have been
wow.
third.
Wow. I find that, and Pew has changed radically.
Well, one angle to watch on the technology front, you're bringing up Google, and I heard on Bloomberg Radio today that Airbnb, which is kind of the hotels.com for wanting to stay somewhere, that they had proactively started deleting reservations in Charlottesville for white supremacists who booked reservations there. If you're going for the protest, they proactively deleted your reservation.
How did they know you were?
They looked at their social media profiles, connected that, deleted it. It's something that very few people will argue with, but a pretty dangerous precedent.
Oh, I would argue the heck out of it. That would mean that is it okay to delete their booking or cancel their booking, but if the Libertarian Party wanted to go somewhere, would it be? I mean, who draws that line? And I think we're constitutionally protected from things like that. I mean, if Airbnb decided to look on social media and determine that you were black or a Democrat and delete your booking in an area, people would be up in arms over it. I hope people are up in arms over that.
It's a dangerous precedent, especially with so few tech companies controlling so much of the internet. It only takes a few decisions that they make, and they can kind of do whatever they want.
They can. You guys are both pretty techy. You're actually a programmer, aren't you? So, you can be pretty selective in your application of an algorithm. And really kind of slant the news. I mean, just as an experiment, during the election, I typed in Hillary Clinton LI, and I stopped. And on Google, I got library, I got everything but lie. But if I typed it in on a couple other websites, I got lie, which is what everybody's looking for when they type in Hillary Clinton LI, right? So that kind of selective application is a dangerous thing. I think as libertarians we'd all agree that what we want is objective news, actually reporting what is who, what, when, where, why, and how. Isn't that what they teach you in basic journalism?
That's what they used to teach.
That's
what they used to teach.
Yeah, what they used to teach.
Now it's about clicks.
Yep.
Clicks, yes. So now there's... we have, I think, about 10 minutes left in this show. Where does the time go when I'm talking too much? And I was going to talk about, I think we'll go with the concept of immunity of government employees from prosecution of crimes due to sovereignty, which I think was not originally in constitutional documents and was added later. But again, you're trained in law. I don't know what your background in constitutional law is. Gerald, what do you?
I think it's a big problem, this idea that just because you work for the government somehow you have special privileges. We saw
Sounds like divine right of kings, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And
I believe it is from British law, or was inspired by British law.
I mean, we talked about civil asset forfeiture a little bit earlier. We talked about the ability of these entities to create regulations, basically interpreting law and essentially creating law. But more importantly, I mean, a few months ago was an article about how the cops in Hawaii were trying to lobby to be able to get oral sex performed on them by potential prostitutes in order to make sure that they're guilty. And
so isn't that entrapment?
I would call it entrapment. Yeah.
And they probably wouldn't even pay for the service.
No, that's the worst part, right? And there was an article a couple days ago about a Washington Post article about how over the last decade, about 1,800 police officers have been fired for misconduct, but about 450 of them they had to rehire because of the special rights of the officers through their union contracts. And in many of these cases, they didn't even dispute the underlying misconduct. They agreed, yeah, he did that. But then they would say, but you violated his union contract here on these procedures. And that's very dangerous. It's gotten to a point where the government almost organizes against the governed and has more power and influence with representatives than the people do. A case in point, the public sector unions, they're able to just ask for more and more and more, and they have a monopoly over this. It's not like a corporation where you have a private sector union. Maybe the union will ask for too much, and it's going to hurt the company. They'll have to raise their prices, might go bankrupt, or have to do layoffs.
Right, there's no feedback mechanism.
Exactly. Where with the public sector union, they can ask for more forever, and because of monopoly, they'll always get it.
Okay. So, what could be changed? I mean, would you think it'd be possible? I mean, there's a gentleman I know actually wanted to get something on the ballot in the state of California. He couldn't raise the I think $3 million it would take to get the campaign started to do just a thing. I think it was called the Government Accountability Act, where basically, if government employees violated people's rights, that would hold them up to prosecution if they were in the private sector. Then the same rules would apply if they're in the public sector.
That would apply to the state employees then, state of California.
State employees, any employee anywhere. I mean, everybody. I think something like all men are created equal. I read that somewhere. I don't. It's in some little piece of paper somewhere. So I think we're all in agreement on that. And it's a tough thing. And I think my feeling is that the trend of special protections and special rights for certain favored groups, like somebody tried to float an idea a while back. I hope it was squashed immediately, that teachers shouldn't pay any state income tax.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
And thinking I could use that kind of gig. I mean, I'm getting old. Maybe if I didn't pay any federal tax, I could save some more money toward retirement. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah.
That a selected group should have special tax status?
Well, we're voting for software guys to not pay taxes.
Oh, you're both software guys.
That's right.
I'm voting for anyone who knows a software guy.
That's right. There you go.
How about that?
There you go.
All right.
But to your point, I don't see any way, maybe at the state level, if you got it on the ballot and you had a direct vote, I don't see how you would get it repealed at the federal level. Because...
State by state, borough by borough, whatever.
But would it still apply to federal? I mean, how would it apply to federal employees then? You could sue them in a certain state.
No, you could sue them in federal court. I mean, it's going to be a reach, but I think there's a backlash in this country. There's something called Chevron deference and our deference, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to explain it. Try to explain it. Get one of the excellent lawyers on from a place I work to give it a thorough explanation. But the government defers to the government entities to decide what's right and wrong when there's a regulation in question. So that's like...
it's like Congress always voting themselves raises every year.
When they don't pay for anything anyway. So they have a wonderful thing. And I don't know if we have time to cover this, but I think I'll throw it out there. This is a hot button topic for me. I like hawks and eagles, and something like 340,000 birds are killed every year in the United States of America by wind turbines. And I think this is a selective application of the Endangered Species Act, because if one bald eagle was killed during the construction of a nuclear power plant that shut it down. So What do you think of that? Selective application of endangered species laws.
Yeah, that's a tough one because I like the environmental laws as a whole.
Get out. No.
Yeah. It's the application that's the hard part. I think if there's things I don't mind government doing, they would be at the top of the list. Where I don't mind the laws, but then you run into situations like this where they choose how they're going to enforce it. And,
or the John
politics
Duarte
gets
plow
in
in the
everything.
field because he,
Sure.
yeah. All right. So we're getting ready to wrap up the show. Any closing comments about any of the subjects that we've talked about this evening? Any thoughts that might have popped up after the talk? No?
Well, I think back to our media talk. I wish, I know it's in the past now, but I kind of wish Gary Johnson would have gotten a little more favorable coverage. I think he had a few slip-ups in the campaign, and they just jumped on it, and that was that when he talked about, Hillary kind of getting the benefit of the doubt. I don't feel like Gary got much of the benefit of the doubt.
Sorta. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was unfortunate. I definitely voted for him, and I think we're doing a lot better than our current president.
Well, I think a drunken monkey would be doing. No, I have a lot of friends who are big Trump supporters, and I think we're in the unfortunate circumstance in this country where we're this so-called two-party state is actually a one-party state because they're both pro-big government, and we're pro as little government as you can possibly have because, left to their own devices, people have to hold themselves accountable for their actions, and generally human beings are pretty kind to each other, as seen by the billions and billions of dollars that folks give to charity every year. So any closing thoughts?
Well, picking up on the party system, I don't know if you saw the Reason interview a few weeks ago. Justin Amash was talking about, interestingly, he's a libertarian but Republican, and he was talking about how he wants the two-party system to end. That it's creating these ridiculous divisions that aren't really over policy but over personalities, and it's not helping the country. No one really fits into the Republican or Democratic box, and I don't think that system really helps anyone except to just keep bad legislation passing and prevent good legislation from getting through.
I think I'd probably agree with that. I'm a parliamentarian system. If in the U.S., I think government gets shut down every 2 weeks, which might not be a bad thing.
I was going to say that's my
and
only
on
hope.
that note, I think it's time to wrap up. My name is John Cameron. I'm your moderator this evening for Libertarian Counterpoint. I want to thank Brett and Gerald for their wonderful contribution to the show, and ask you to watch us on the next show.